From the research notes of senior xenobiologist Zilith of the Galactic Survey Corps, Survey Vessel Deepseeker, Research Cycle 4891. The fourth review of the data caused my sensory appendages to tremble so violently that I had to coil my primary segments around my research station to maintain stability. My specialized scent glands were releasing stress pheromones at such a rate that junior researcher Krith's protective membrane had taken on a distinctly purple hue of concern. The readings were, by all known laws of planetary development, impossible. System Sol had been marked as a death world system centuries ago, its third planet classified as Class X uninhabitable in the Galactic Survey Corps records. The planet should have been nothing more than another cautionary tale in our database of hostile worlds, a perfect example of how not to expect life to develop. Senior researcher Krith's voice vibrated through our ship's resonance channels, their uncertainty causing slight distortions in the harmonic patterns. We've confirmed the readings from 3 different sensor arrays. The quantum verification protocols are all green. I extended my forward segments in a gesture of scientific frustration, my auxiliary brain clusters struggling to process the implications. Run them again. Check for solar interference. Plot gravitational anomalies. There must be some explanation besides. I couldn't even bring myself to finish the sentence. Besides life. Intelligent life. Spacefaring life. I coiled closer to my display, my sensory stalks absorbing every detail of the data streams. The atmospheric composition alone should have prevented complex life from developing nearly 21% oxygen, a level of reactivity that would corrode most known biological structures. The gravity at 9.8 ms2 would crush most species support structures. The temperature variations ranged from -89.2 degC to 56.7 degC in different regions, extreme enough to shatter molecular bonds in most known forms of life. Senior researcher Krith interrupted my contemplation, their segments writhing in what I recognized as excitement. We've detected artificial satellites, thousands of them, and they're in precisely calculated orbits. I quickly extended my viewing appendage to the main sensor display. Krith was right, a complex network of artificial objects encircled the planet in mathematically perfect patterns. More troubling still were the primitive fusion drives we detected leaving and returning to the planet's surface. Someone down there had mastered nuclear physics. Impossible, I whispered, my specialized vocabulary sac struggling to form the word. Check the geological records again. The historical data scrolled across my display multiple extinction-level events, including an impact so massive it had torn a chunk of the planet away to form its oversized moon. Regular bombardment by radiation from its unstable star. Massive supervolcano eruptions. Periodic ice ages. The surface was mostly covered in corrosive dihydrogen monoxide that regularly fell from the sky as a primitive molecular bombardment system. And yet, senior researcher Krith's voice had taken on an almost harmonious tone of excitement. We're detecting radio waves, complex ones. They appear to be entertainment broadcasts. I extended my analysis appendages and interfaced directly with the sensor array. The data was undeniable. Mixed in with the technological signatures were countless transmissions of music, stories, and something called cat videos. Send a priority alert to the Survey Corps Council, I finally decided, my segments aligning into our species' formal presentation pose despite being alone with Krith. Inform them that we have discovered something unprecedented, a civilization that has not only survived on a death world, but appears to be thriving there. As Krith hurried to comply, I added a personal note to my research log. The existence of life on Sol 3 defies everything we know about planetary evolution and species development. Either our understanding of what makes a planet habitable is fundamentally flawed, or we have discovered something truly remarkable, a species that simply refuse to accept the limitations of their environment. We must investigate further. The implications for xenobiology and planetary science are staggering. And I must admit, despite my scientific reservations, I find myself experiencing an emotion our species rarely feels: curiosity about a world that should, by all rights, be lethal to visit. Perhaps that makes me as irrational as whatever species has chosen to make this death world their home. The human vessel emerged from behind their moon with a grace that defied its brutal appearance. Unlike our organically grown research ships, with their smooth curves and bioengineered hulls, their craft was all sharp angles and exposed heat radiators. Massive fusion engines pulsed with barely contained power, and thermal readings suggested internal temperatures that would have cooked most species alive. Fascinating crith vibrated through our resonance channels, their segments writhing with scientific excitement. Their hull is designed to deflect radiation rather than absorb it, and those are primitive point defense weapons along the dorsal spine. I coiled tighter around my observation post, all 4 of my primary sensory stalks extended to their full length. The human ship, barely a quarter the size of our research vessel, was approaching our designated meeting coordinates with remarkable precision. None of us had expected the inhabitants of Sol 3 to respond to our communication attempts so quickly, let alone send a ship to meet us at the system's edge. They matched our velocity perfectly, our navigation specialist Emerith noted with professional admiration, using chemical thrusters for fine adjustments. How wonderfully primitive, yet effective. "Welcome aboard the GSC Deepseeker," I transmitted through our universal translator once their ship completed its docking maneuver. "We are surprised by your swift response." The airlock cycled, and I watched through our observation dome as 2 humans emerged. Their environmental suits looked laughably basic compared to our protective membrane's rigid structures of metal and composite materials rather than living tissue. Yet they moved with an assurance that suggested complete confidence in their equipment. Then, to our collective horror, the taller of the 2 humans reached up and simply removed their helmet. "Oh gods of the deep places," Crith pulsed in shock, their protective membrane flashing warning colors. "They're exposing themselves to our atmosphere without even testing the composition." "Thanks for having us aboard," the now exposed human said, displaying his teeth in what we would later learn was a friendly gesture rather than a threat display. "Captain Orion Paulson of the Earth Exploration Vessel Magellan. This is my science officer, Dr. Yates." The second human also removed their helmet, revealing fascinating variations in their external coloring and facial features. I found myself unconsciously noting these details for my xenobiology reports. "Hope we didn't keep you waiting," Captain Paulson continued, his voice carrying what our translators identified as both authority and amusement. "My great-grandfather would never forgive me if I was late to humanity's first official alien meeting. 5 generations of Paulsons have captained exploration vessels, and I wasn't about to break tradition." Dr. Yates performed an odd motion with their optical organs, what they called rolling their eyes, suggesting some form of social commentary about their captain's statement. "Your vessel's approach was most efficient," I managed to respond, trying to focus on scientific discourse rather than my continuing shock at their cavalier approach to atmospheric exposure, though we note some concerns about your radiation shielding levels. "Oh, don't worry about that," Paulson said with another tooth display. "Humans are surprisingly radiation resistant. Picked that up from living on Earth, I suppose. Speaking of which, I understand you folks have some questions about our planet." I extended my forward segments in what I hoped conveyed scientific curiosity rather than the existential dread I was actually feeling. These humans didn't just survive on a death world, they spoke about its deadly characteristics with pride. Several thousand questions, in fact, I admitted. Perhaps we could begin with how your species survived the oxygen-rich atmosphere long enough to develop spaceflight. "Oxygen-rich?" Dr. Yates asked, consulting a primitive data device. "Oh, you mean the 21% concentration? That's actually a bit low for our preference. Some of our athletes train in 30% oxygen environments." My segments involuntarily contracted in shock. Behind me, I could sense Creeth beginning to lose pigmentation control. "Shall we continue this discussion somewhere more comfortable?" Paulson suggested, seemingly oblivious to our distress. "I'd love to hear more about why you folks think Earth should be uninhabitable. It'll give us a chance to explain why we love living there so much." Love. Living. On a death world. I began to suspect this conversation would require extensive updating of our xenobiology databases. Personal log addendum: these humans appear to be as physically resilient as they are culturally confounding. Captain Paulson mentioned this was their first alien contact, yet they display none of the fear or reverence we typically encounter from newly contacted species. Instead, they seem eager, excited even, To think that their governing bodies chose to send a family of generational explorers for first contact. Perhaps there is more to learn about their psychology than their biology. We convened in what humans would call our conference chamber, though it was simply a larger resonance pool where we could comfortably coil while communicating. The environment was kept at our standard moisture levels, which meant a fine mist perpetually filled the air. To our continuing amazement, neither human seemed bothered by the humidity. Captain Paulson and Dr. Yates sat on hastily fabricated supports, their bodies maintaining that bizarre vertical posture that seemed to defy energy efficiency. I noticed they had declined our offer of moisture-wicking membranes, saying their clothes were sufficient protection. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, I began, my translation sacks working overtime to handle the complex concepts. You evolved. On the surface? Not in protected underground chambers or deep-sea trenches. Surface dwellers, born and bred, Paulson confirmed, reclining in his seat with remarkable casualness given the circumstances. Though we did originally come from the ocean, if you go back far enough. Still love the sea. My family has a sailing tradition almost as old as our spacefaring one. Sailing? Krith pulsed questioningly. You mean you voluntarily travel on top of the corrosive dihydrogen monoxide layer? We call it water, Dr. Yates explained, and yes, for recreation, usually. Though these days most sailing is done for sport rather than transportation. I accessed my historical database, projecting the information into the chamber's atmosphere as a series of holographic displays. But the meteor impacts? The ice ages? The massive volcanic eruptions? Your own records show multiple near-extinction events. The Permian extinction alone eliminated 95% of all species on your world. Ah, the great dying. Paulson nodded, showing those teeth again. That was a rough one. But life bounced back. Always does on Earth. We've got a saying in my family: life finds a way. That's from Jurassic Park, Yates muttered. Still applies, Paulson shrugged. Look, we're stubborn that way. Humans have what we call grit. Grit, my translator stumbled over the word, unable to find an equivalent in any of its xenolinguistic databases. Means we don't give up, Paulson explained, leaning forward with an intensity that caused my segments to ripple nervously. Ever. Even when we should. Especially when we should. It's a defining human characteristic, Yates added, their scientific tone somewhat reassuring. When faced with what appears to be an impossible situation, humans tend to view it as a challenge rather than a barrier. I processed this for a moment, my auxiliary brain clusters working in parallel. But why? Why not seek safety, stability? Our records show your species had the capability to build underground habitats during your last ice age. Why stay on the surface? Paulson laughed, a sound that still triggered our ship's harmonic sensors. And miss the sunrise? Listen, my great-great-grandmother used to say that humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our intelligence, it's our stubbornness. Our ancestors survived an ice age with pointed sticks and animal furs. They figured out how to make fire and used it to survive cold that should have killed them. When volcanoes darkened the skies, they adapted. When meteors wiped out most life, our predecessors just dug in deeper. But what drove them to continue? Krith interjected, their scientific curiosity apparently overriding their usual deference. Surely simple survival instinct doesn't explain such persistence. Curiosity, Yates said. The need to know what's over the next hill, across the next ocean, or around the next star. We can't help ourselves. And Spite, Paulson added with another grin. Never underestimate humanity's capacity to do something just because someone said it was impossible. I extended my analysis appendages, interfacing with our ship's historical database. According to our records, your species went from first powered flight to landing on your moon in less than 7 of your decades. The technological leap seems improbable. Someone said it couldn't be done, Paulson explained, as if this justified everything. So we did it. Same reason we climbed our highest mountains, dove to our deepest ocean trenches, and now we're heading to the stars. Someone, somewhere, probably said it was impossible. Because it should be impossible, I pointed out. Your planet's gravity well alone makes space travel enormously energy-intensive. The radiation beyond your atmosphere should have deterred exploration. The psychological effects of isolation in space. All just problems to solve, Yates interrupted, their voice carrying what my translator identified as pride. We're quite good at solving problems, especially the ones that are supposed to be impossible. I noticed that both humans were showing their teeth again, but now I was beginning to understand this wasn't aggression, it was enthusiasm. They were genuinely excited by the prospect of overcoming lethal challenges. I believe I said carefully that we may need to revise our understanding of what constitutes a survivable environment, and perhaps our definition of impossible as well. That's the spirit, Paulson exclaimed. Now, would you like to hear about how we used to hunt? It's a great story about human persistence that usually really unsettles other species. My segments coiled tighter involuntarily. Somehow, I knew this was going to require updating even more of our xenobiology databases. Personal log addendum: the humans have a saying, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger." The implications of evolving on a world where this statement is considered a positive philosophy are troubling. Further study is clearly needed, assuming my neural clusters can handle the stress of learning more about these remarkable and terrifying beings. The more I learned about humans and their homeworld, the more my understanding of evolutionary principles needed revision. As I sat in our primary research chamber, analyzing the medical data Dr. Yates had provided, my segments kept involuntarily contracting in disbelief. Your endoskeleton, I observed, reviewing their medical scans again. It continuously rebuilds itself stronger when stressed. And this is normal. Wolff's Law, Yates explained, pulling up detailed bone density scans on their primitive but effective tablet device. Our bones adapt to the pressures we put on them. The same with our muscles. The more we push them, the stronger they get. Within reason, Paulson added, casually lifting a piece of our research equipment that would have required at least 3 of my species to move. Though humans tend to have different definitions of reasonable than most species, I'm starting to gather. I extended my sensory stalks to better observe his demonstration, and this adaptive capability evolved naturally, not through genetic engineering. Pure evolution, Yates confirmed. Earth's gravity and our ancestors' active lifestyles shaped us. We evolved to be tough because we had to be. Speaking of ancestors, Paulson interjected, his voice carrying what my translator identified as anticipation. Want to hear about how we used to hunt? We've analyzed your dental structures, I noted. You appear to be omnivorous, though surprisingly inefficient at processing most organic matter. It's not about the teeth, Paulson grinned. It's about the chase. What followed was perhaps the most disturbing revelation yet about human biology. They were persistence predators, a concept so alien that Krith had to leave the chamber halfway through the explanation, their segments practically vibrating with horror. You pursued your prey until it died of exhaustion. I struggled to keep my translator sacs functioning properly. But our scans show your species is relatively slow compared to most predatory animals on your world. We don't have to be fast, Yates explained. We just have to keep going. Humans can maintain a steady running pace for hours, even days. We can sweat to cool ourselves, track prey over vast distances, and simply not stop. The prey runs away, Paulson continued, clearly enjoying my distress, but it has to rest eventually. We just keep following, walking, jogging, tracking, hour after hour, until the prey is too exhausted to continue. That's. My translator actually glitched trying to find an appropriate word. Efficient, Yates supplied. We became extremely good at it. Our bodies evolved specific adaptations: efficient bipedal movement, exceptional stamina, sophisticated cooling systems, and advanced pattern recognition for tracking. And you still do this? I asked, hoping the answer was no. Not for hunting much anymore, Paulson said, but for sport. Ever heard of a marathon? When they explained the concept of running 42.2 kilometers voluntarily for recreation, I had to initiate my emergency cooling protocols. But that's not even the impressive part, Yates added. Look up ultramarathons when you have a chance, or the fact that humans can learn to hold their breath for over 20 minutes, dive hundreds of meters deep without equipment, or survive in temperatures that would kill most mammals. It's all about pushing limits, Paulson said, his voice carrying that unsettling pride again. Take our space program. When we first started launching rockets, The failure rate was enormous. Lost a lot of good people, but we kept going, kept pushing. Now we've got colonies on Mars, another world you folks classified as uninhabitable, I believe. I quickly accessed our database. Mars lacks a proper atmosphere, has extreme temperature variations, lethal radiation levels, and toxic soil. How could you possibly? We're terraforming it, Yates said simply, as if changing an entire planet's ecosystem was a perfectly reasonable undertaking. It's a long-term project, but we're making progress. The first generation of children born on Mars just started school, actually. My segments coiled so tightly I nearly lost sensor contact with my research station. You're breeding on a planet that should be lethal to all known forms of life. Well, we had to modify ourselves a bit for that, Yates admitted. Some genetic adaptations for the lower gravity, enhanced radiation resistance, more efficient oxygen processing. But the basic human template is remarkably adaptable. The Paulson family is thinking of starting a Mars branch, the captain added cheerfully. Can't let Earth have all the exploration traditions. I spent several moments processing this information, my auxiliary brain clusters working overtime. These humans hadn't just survived on a death world, they had thrived because of its challenges. Their bodies grew stronger under stress, their technology advanced in response to obstacles, and their cultures celebrated the very acts that should have led to their extinction. One last question, I ventured. Your spacesuits. Our scans show they provide far less protection than we would consider safe for space travel. Oh, those old things, Paulson laughed. They're basically just pressure seals with some radiation shielding. Humans can actually survive in vacuum for a short time if we have to, though it's not exactly comfortable. Personal log addendum. I am beginning to understand why humans classify their achievement levels by referring to them as impossible. They appear to use the word not as a barrier, but as a challenge. When they encounter a physical limitation, they don't adapt their behavior to work around it, they adapt their bodies and technology to break through it. The implications for galactic society are concerning. Official report to the Galactic Survey Corps Council. From Senior Xenobiologist Sizilith. Subject: reclassification request for Sol 3 local designation Earth. Priority urgent. Distinguished council members. I must begin this report by admitting an error in our fundamental understanding of planetary habitability and species development. Our classification of Earth as a Class X uninhabitable death world requires immediate revision, not because our initial assessment of the planet's hostile conditions was incorrect, but because we failed to consider a crucial possibility that life might not just survive in such conditions, but evolve to thrive because of them. The human species, designation Homo sapiens, represents a paradigm shift in our understanding of evolutionary adaptation. While our society has long believed that life should evolve toward comfort and stability, humans prove there's another path, one forged in adversity. We consider these observations. 1. Biological adaptations. They possess regenerative capabilities that strengthen their bodies in response to damage. Their temperature regulation system is so efficient it allows them to function in environments ranging from 50°C to 50°C. Their endurance capabilities exceed any known sapient species. They can survive radiation levels we previously considered lethal. 2. Technological development. Their technology doesn't attempt to shield them from their environment, it helps them engage with it. Their ships don't hide from solar radiation, they use it for power. Their buildings don't all shelter in stable regions, they engineer them to withstand earthquakes and storms. Their spacesuits are designed for functionality over protection, reflecting their biological resilience. 3. Cultural implications. They viewed deadly environments as challenges rather than barriers. Their literature and art often celebrate the concept of overcoming impossible odds. Their scientific advancement is driven by a seemingly irrational desire to prove limitations wrong. They deliberately seek out and settle in hostile environments. Most remarkably, they are already establishing permanent settlements on Mars, another world we classified as uninhabitable. Their approach to terraforming involves both changing the environment to suit their needs and adapting themselves to suit the environment. Captain Paulson informed me that their Mars colonies are growing so rapidly they've had to establish traffic control for the shipping lanes between worlds. Speaking of Captain Paulson, I must include a note about human governance. They chose to send a member of a generational exploration family as their first contact representative. This decision speaks volumes about their species' priorities and values. The Paulson family has apparently been at the forefront of human exploration for centuries, treating the deadly vacuum of space as simply another frontier to conquer. Personal addendum. I have accepted an invitation to visit Earth, a decision that has caused considerable concern among my colleagues. However, Captain Paulson has convinced me to observe something called an Iron Man competition. Apparently, humans compete to swim 3.86 kilometers through corrosive dihydrogen monoxide, then immediately cycle 180.25 kilometers through variable terrain, followed by running 42.2 kilometers in whatever weather conditions happen to occur. They do this voluntarily, for entertainment. Dr. Yates assures me this isn't even considered particularly extreme by human standards. They mentioned something called ultra-endurance events, but I requested they withhold that information until after my visit, as my neural clusters were already struggling to process the implications. Recommendations. 1. Immediate reclassification of Earth from Death World to Crucible World, a new category I propose for planets that create species of exceptional capability through environmental pressure. 2. Revision of our first contact protocols. Our current approach of gradual acclimation to galactic society may be inappropriate for species that evolved under extreme conditions. 3. Establishment of a dedicated research team to study human adaptation capabilities. Their ability to colonize worlds we considered uninhabitable could revolutionize our approach to space exploration. 4. Review of our planetary classification system. If humans can thrive on Earth, how many other worlds have we incorrectly classified as uninhabitable? Final personal note. The humans have a saying that Captain Paulson shared with me: "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger." I initially dismissed this as biological impossibility. Now I understand it's not just an observation, it's their species' fundamental operating principle. Perhaps that's why they survived when our models said they shouldn't. They don't just endure adversity, they actively seek it out, adapt to it, and emerge stronger. Their grit, this relentless determination to push beyond their limits, has shaped them into something unique among sapient species. I find myself experiencing an emotion our species rarely feels: inspiration. If humans can survive and thrive in conditions we thought impossible, what other assumptions might we be wrong about? As I prepare for my visit to Earth, I've begun my own physical conditioning program. Captain Paulson suggested I might enjoy something called light hiking in a region called the Rockies. When I expressed concern about the altitude and terrain, he simply grinned and said, "What's the worst that could happen?" Given what I now know about humans, I find that question more terrifying than reassuring. End report. Addendum: the humans have a habit of naming deadly things in what I now recognize as a challenge to themselves. Death Valley, Deadman's Creek, the Dead Sea, all places they regularly visit for recreation. I'm beginning to suspect they name things death simply to prove the name wrong. Perhaps some of their grit has indeed rubbed off on me. After all, I'm voluntarily visiting a death world. For science, of course. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you loved it. Please remember to subscribe if you did like it so you can see more videos like this. And please give us a like and a comment too. I'll see you in the next one.